I need some help here. So I've started this piece about 9 months ago. I started by piecing up the animation sequence, blocking in some rough VFX, adjusting the timing, and did some polishing. I even pivoted my ideas and tried several versions on the final beam attack. But now looking at this piece, I feel like I don't quite like the colors, so let's fix that. As you can see, this piece is more of a red and orange color theme. While I think it works quite well now already, I kind of want to shift this piece towards a more evil and dark kind of energy, something more mysterious, you know? Color is one of the most effective way to evoke different emotions. I made this short a while ago, and even though all the impacts have the same timing, same elements, same shapes, simply by just changing the colors, we can make them feel very different. So now the question here becomes, what kind of color can evoke that mysterious and evil energy? Now, I'm not sure if this is color theory, but when I think of colors, I like to think of two things: nature and experience. So what I mean by nature is that we often associate a color with where we see them in nature. And then from that, it determines how we feel about that color. For example, the color green we often see in nature in like trees and leaves or grass, something that's very earthy and calm and peaceful. So when we see the color green, it often gives us a sense of calm and healing, like a walk in the forest. Or maybe the color red makes us think of fire, and that evokes an emotion of heat and maybe even danger. Our experiences also shape how we view a color. The colors we see in media growing up, like in TV ads and paintings, or even video games, can shape how we view a color. Let's take the color white for example. We often see these colors in paintings of like angels or saints and in the bride's dress during a wedding. So that's why we often see white as something that's pure and clean and even holy. So what color will work for a more evil kind of energy? You can take a second to think about it yourselves, but for me, I landed on this color magenta. Specifically a darker kind of magenta. Magenta and purple are often used in video games for poison or something that's dangerous, and it evokes a mysterious kind of feeling too for me. So I decided to swap my whole color theme to this darker magenta, and now let's get into Unreal Engine and start making the changes. So this part is quite simple and kind of tedious. You can see I started with adjusting the beams first. I took a screenshot of it and then used it as a visual guide to change the rest of the elements. And then it's just the process of isolating each emitter in the particle systems, adjusting its color, and then go back to see if everything works well together after the change. One thing though that I like to point out is that in the beam, there's this brighter core which has a more beige or cream-like color to it, and I think that works quite well with the darker magenta that we picked earlier. So when you're picking a color theme for your work, besides the main color, you'll also need to pick a secondary color that complements well with the main one, which is the bright beige and dark magenta in my case here. Alright, so now that we finished adjusting the colors, let's take a look at where we're at now. Although there's still some parts that I don't like, some of the elements having the wrong shade of magenta, or some parts of the color looks a bit too washed out, I feel like overall this is going in a good direction and giving us that mysterious and evil vibe that we're going for. But we're still lacking some elements for that final attack here. That's why you can see I already added some elements like the spiraling ribbons and the ground impact just to experiment a bit of what I can add to this. Now a quick side note, I would like to show you how I made those meshes in Blender for the VFX. For the bottom spikes, I'll need a mesh that looks like a vase and spreads outwards on the top. So for that, I started with a cylinder. I removed the caps on both sides, adjusted the UV, added some loop cuts, and then we can use the proportional editing in Blender. So when we expand the top loop here, all the vertices that is around them will get expanded smoothly too. And for the spiral ribbons, we'll need to turn on the extra curve object add-on here. It's a default add-on in Blender, so you don't need to install it, just turn it on in the settings. And with that, we can add a spiral curve. I'll adjust the shape a bit here, but the most important thing here is that we extrude it so that it's not just a line and turns into a mesh. And the rest is just some shape adjustments and tweaking the UVs, and then we're done. Okay, now when we talk about compositions, I like to think about the big, medium, and small. Meaning, for a composition to work well, we will need elements of different scales, big, medium, and small. Take this fantasy VFX that I made, for example. You can see here that the big elements will be the main shape in the middle, which is the sphere and the spiky rings around it. And for the glow and the energy wave that's behind it, that works as our medium elements, supporting our main shapes here. And as a final touch, we have these small diamonds that is flying out. So now let's look at our current piece with the same principle in mind. You can see that for the final beam attack, we only have one big main shape, which is the beam itself. So now we'll need to come up with ideas for the medium and small elements that we can add to this beam attack. And for that, we will need to go back to the drawing board and create some concepts. And by drawing board, I actually mean my iPad. Alright, here's me on my iPad making a VFX concept. This app is called Procreate, if any of you are wondering about that. I started with freehanding some rough shapes, keeping it pretty loose, just having fun with the shapes and flow of what I had in mind and exploring different options at this stage. And once I landed on something that kind of works and I quite like, I dropped the opacity of the sketch and then used the lasso tool to carve out some hard-edged shapes. The lasso tool is such a great way to create stylized VFX concepts. It makes you really think about the shapes since it's hard-edged, so you can't hide behind all the smudge and messy brush strokes, but forces you to think about, does your shapes look good? And then finally, I'm using some layer effect to add some colors to it. And that's basically my process of making a concept. I really enjoyed spending time drawing with my own hands, doing some hand painting work, because at my day job I rarely get the opportunity to create concepts myself because they're usually an actual concept artist for that, or we usually just dive right into making VFX due to the deadlines. So I always get excited when I get to draw or paint something. So now you already might spot it in the background here, but let's take a closer look at the final result. One of the most obvious change is the color change here. Besides the magenta and the beige color, I also added some black elements as a third color. You can also see there's those spinning ribbons and ground impact that I already added to the actual VFX itself. Although I do think I need to maybe hand paint some textures or polish the material to make it look closer to the concept. I also added some ground decals there and some spiky shapes that's flying out from the beam. In the beam itself, I also added those pointy diamond sparkle shapes. As you may see in other parts of the VFX, there's already this kind of elements that I added. So I think that adding that into the beam here can make everything feels more consistent too. And finally, there's some of these tiny sparks that's just flying around to bring everything together. So now that we have our concept ready as our action plan here, it's time to jump back into Unreal Engine, create some textures, polishing the materials to make our VFX look exactly like the concept. So here I'm just back on my iPad painting the texture for the spiral ribbons. I started with a more sketchy brush to create those wispy shapes. Since I would need this texture to tile, meaning that it should be seamless connecting from the top to the bottom. And the way I do this in Procreate is a little bit stupid, but hey, it works. I duplicate the layer and I move one of the layers upwards half the length. I move the other one downwards also half the length. And then I just blend the seam in the middle. Honestly, I hope that Procreate can come up with a new feature to do this automatically, but it is what it is for now. Once I get the shapes that I like, we will again use the lasso tool here to create some clear and hard-edged shape. Since the material I'll be using in Unreal Engine for this will be a masked one, so there's no need to add any blur or glow to this. And then I'll use the liquify tool to do some final polishes and we're done. Next, I jump into Substance Designer to create a SDF texture from it. Now SDF stands for Signed Distance Field, which is a powerful tool to create hard-edged shape and make them dissolve. It's a great technique and definitely will worth its own video to explain it, so let me know if you're interested in that in the comments down below. After that, it's just endlessly polishing this VFX, tweaking the size, the shapes, and the timing. It's always fun at this point to see your work really getting to its final stage. And now let's take a look at our final result. If you go back to the beginning and compare it with where we started, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. But we're not stopping there. In the next video, I'm gonna be adding more elements, maybe a flash frame or some camera shake, so make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out. And I'll see you in the next video.